Hello ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, my name is Brad. This is my channel Animate Orange, and in this video I'm going to review the Transformers Megatron model from MU. Now that's a rather big box right there. If you've been following my channel, you notice I built a lot of 3D metal models, a lot of metal earth models, as well as some other things, and I've decided to put this large model together. Now this is a 3D metal model. It's made up of 8 flat sheets of metal with pieces that you clip out, twist and fold and bend and shape and put together. This is a more advanced model. Doesn't really, it may say it somewhere, I'm not really sure, because honestly this is from China and there's only a little bit of English on it. It's mostly in other languages, but this is a rather advanced model in my opinion. If you've not built any 3D metal models before, I would not suggest starting with this. I would suggest starting with much smaller models. Even if you have experience in building other models, I still wouldn't start with this because of its complexity. I'd warm yourself up to something else first before I jump into this. But if you do have a lot of experience building metal earth models or Peace Cool models or other 3D metal models, and you've worked your way up and you're fairly confident in what you're doing, that's when I would tackle this. Now this ultimately constructs into a rather large model. You can see this thing is about as big as my head. It is very tall and very complex model, and each piece it builds in several different sections. You build one arm and then you build the other arm. Actually, I've got that in reverse. Then you build the center sections and this hip section, and then you build one leg and you build the other leg, and then it all comes together. Actually, the top part comes partially together. The top section and 2 arms come together. Then you build all the rest, and then it all comes together in one big in piece. And it is an amazing model to build. Just lovely. Now, aside from the fact that it is such a large and such a complex model, that's not the only reason that I say that this is a more advanced build. The other reason I say is because honestly there's a little bit less hand-holding in these instructions. When you build something from Metal Earth or something from Peace Cool, there's usually a lot of notation about how to twist the tabs, when to fold the tabs. There's little hints and tips about how to put some of these things together. There's mostly clear indications about which side faces where. Now this particular model does do some of that. It does show you a lot of the front and back, although that's still up to some interpretation, but it really doesn't tell you whether you should twist or fold a tab, so you really have to use your best judgment. And that's where I say, another reason I say that you want to be a little bit more experienced. You want to get to a point with building these Metal Earth or 3D metal models or Peace Cool models or whoever you're building. You want to get to a point where you're comfortable deciding and knowing which way should I do with the tab. Should I twist it? Should I fold it? Which one's more secure? Which one looks better? You know, get your own opinion on how to do things and your own feel for it before you start building something like this. That's another reason. Aside from the complexity of it, aside from the complexity of bending and shaping the parts, knowing which way, being comfortable deciding which way to, how to deal with the tabs, because this is not going to tell you, is another reason I'd say this is an advanced model. Another reason that I would say this is a rather advanced model is because you're not just dealing with fairly simple shapes that fold together. And this is one of the things I love about it. It all starts out as a flat sheet. It's absolutely wonderful. They all do. But there are several instances where pieces fold together around other pieces in such a way that it's somewhat unique. You normally wouldn't have dealt with this sort of complexity and layering that this model has. There's areas like in the arm where you build 2 or 3 different pieces that almost look like the final piece, but they actually come together and layer into a larger piece. And you have, like the back of this arm, you have pieces that are layered underneath and inside of other pieces. The back of this leg, you've got sections inside of other sections, and it really adds to the depth and complexity and look of it all. But it also means a little bit different line of thought. You want to be comfortable with doing the simpler shapes before you start tackling the more complicated and layered shapes, because some of the way that these things fold is a little bit tricky, and doing it for the first time it could go very wrong. Inside of this box you will find 8 sheets of metal. 6 of those sheets are rather large sheets. They're just about as big as that box. Bigger than anything you'd get from Metal Earth, bigger than anything you'd get from Iconics or Peace Cool. Two of the sheets are smaller, but they're still bigger than most anything you would get from Metal Earth. They're maybe roughly the same size, though not as long as an Iconics or some of the bigger Peace Cool models. There's a lot of sheets in there. You also get this set of instructions. It almost looks like a catalog. It's very colorful on the outside. There is some color on the inside. It shows you all the different sheets of metal and their layout. And then it goes into step-by-step instructions on building this model. There are 44 sheets inside of this instruction booklet, all coming together at the end with your final build. This thing builds in sections, so you'll build one arm, you'll build the other arm, you'll build part of the upper section, they'll come together. You'll build the torso, you'll build another leg, you'll build the other leg, and then it all comes together in the end. It also includes, inside the box, finger cots to a little bit protect your fingers, but more to protect the metal from fingerprints, which I did try to use. It's kind of a hit and miss. They do impair what you're doing a little bit, but they don't. And they impair what you're doing a little bit, but they help keep the fingerprints off, but they're not an absolute way of keeping this thing fingerprint free, because after a while, honestly, sitting down doing this entire thing in one build, if you can do that, more power to you. It took me several tries or several sessions to build the entire thing because it is such a long and complex build. You do not get any sort of tools with this model, with this kit. You want to get, I recommend getting some tweezers. I recommend getting precision tweezers specifically. I recommend getting maybe some long needle nose pliers. I strongly recommend getting some clippers, maybe even some nail clippers, something to clip the parts out of the trees or out of the sheets so that you aren't trying to bend and twist back and forth, because you can do that, but the sheer number of parts are going to end up accidentally breaking parts, either the one you're trying to get out or a neighboring part folding things back and forth, because the metal is going to break fairly easily. So you want to get some tools. I suggest dowel rods or drill bits to help curve things. You might find some tools around your house to help shape some of the things, but you're definitely going to want some sort of maybe flat nose pliers, long needle nose pliers, precision tweezers, some dowel rods or drill bits to do some shaping of things, and possibly even some beads or marbles or some sort of round object to do a little bit of dome shaping, although there's not a lot of dome shapes in this model. It's mostly angles and curved parts. You're going to want to set a lot of time together, a lot of time aside to build this model, and I strongly suggest finding an area where you can set it up and leave it for an extended period, because if you can sit down and do the whole thing in one build, more power to you. But this took me 20 hours of build time just to put it together. And that's not counting the time it took to find and clip out all the parts. Honestly, if you add all that in, we're talking probably 24 hours or close to, just to build this model. So I did it in several sections. And if you try to build it and you can't continue, and you need to move the sheets and move your build space and put it up and take it back out, the more you flex those sheets, the more you move them, the more likely down the road parts are going to break. And you cannot so easily get replacement parts for these models unless maybe you live in China. I'm not sure. Metal Earth models here in the United States, you can just say, hey, I broke a model, can you send me another piece? And a lot of times they would help you. But with MU, I don't even know how you would do that. So it's very expensive to buy another model if you break a part. Now that we've talked a little bit about what you get in the box and what you'll need to build it, I've got several videos where I show building the different sections if you want to check those out. But let's talk about what I think, final review of this model. Is it worth it? Absolutely. I really enjoy this model. There are so many things about the detail about this model that I really enjoy. Starting from the beginning, when you first put that first arm and first fist together, first hand together, each finger has its own part. That's the level of detail we're talking about here. I was so impressed by that right from the start, that I'm not just making one hand that just kind of folds around in sort of a finger shape. Each finger, including the thumb, have their own part that fold over onto another part, giving it such amazing detail. There are pieces inside of other pieces, pieces buried in layers of other constructed pieces, and it again adds just so much detail. That's this model is so large that they can do that, and they have done that, and they've layered it, and it's just so amazing. It takes so much time, but it's very, very much worth it to go through all of this and all these layers. And there's so many times where you're putting a part together, unlike other models, where I can kind of see where I'm going with this part. I can see how these pieces fit, and they're going to fold, and they're going to make an arm, and they're going to make a foot, or they're going to make the turret for a tank, or, you know, the top piece of a building. There's many situations in this where I'm putting this part together, and I kind of know maybe it's part of the arm, but which part? I don't know, because there's so much layering to it. It isn't until you start getting a good chunk of it together and folding the 2 or 3 different pieces together. And that's one of the things. Sometimes these models, sometimes the build, you've got this one big piece that folds up into part of the arm, another piece folds over on top of it, and they come together into a larger piece. That's how they bury detail inside of detail. That's how they layer things. It's a bit more complex, and it keeps you from seeing what the final result's going to be until you get really close to that final result. But it's really, really amazing. And it really tested the tools that I have and the skill that I have putting this together, because on top of the usual tools of pliers and tweezers and whatnot, there were some of the sculpting tools and tools that I don't usually pull out very often came in handy, because there's so many situations where you have to reach deep inside a model to fold tabs over because it's so complex. It's not terrible, it's not overly difficult, but it's part of what makes that detail. So it offers another level of challenge in the tools that you use, the skills that you need, the vision, the forward looking that you need to be able to look ahead and see how a part comes together, and the complex folds and shapes to put some of these pieces together. It tests your skill, but it's well worth it. It's a challenge, and the end result is amazing. And I kind of mentioned this in the beginning, one of the caveat, or one of the downsides almost, and I hesitate to call it a downside, but one of the things about this MU model is it's not going to tell you whether to twist or fold the tab. You really need to figure that out for yourself, and sometimes that's very debatable. And I could get a bunch of people together here with me who build these models, and we could debate which way to fold some of these tabs, and some of it's your own choice, but you really need to have a sense of, should I twist or should I fold, or how should I handle these tabs to make them fit and work. You get a little less guidance and a little less hand-holding with this model, because it's not going to tell you, these instructions aren't going to tell you to twist or fold a tab, and it's not going to give you a lot of tips to how to make these folds and make these bends and how to twist tabs temporarily and fold them later. It's just going to show you these parts come together and these tabs go here and this part faces out, and that's it. You got to figure the rest of it out. So it's a bit more advanced, and you need to come into this having some comfort with how you're going to handle these situations, and if you do, you're going to end up with an amazing model. There are areas that I struggled with myself, even after building over 100 different other 3D metal models. There were some areas that were kind of new to me, and how do I figure this out? Like, for instance, this back of the arm here, you've got a section that has fins in it, and each arm has that section, and these fins, it's 4 fins, if I remember correctly, that fit inside of a little box area that folds up around them. And getting those 4 fins to line up properly while you fold both sides in is a bit of a challenge. And at first look, I'm like, how in the world did I do this? The first time I did it, I didn't do it very well, and I tried to fold the sides up and bend and then flatten out the pieces inside of there. That didn't go very smoothly. I figured out the second time that I did this, when I did the other arm, was to use a magnet, and the box piece that the other fins go into, put a magnet under there, fold up one side, put the tabs of the fins into one side, and let the magnet hold them in place. Once you get all 4 lined up, you can, using the magnet to kind of hold them still, line the pieces up with the other tabs as you fold them up. That made it a lot easier. So there's advanced techniques that you have to figure out to make these models work, like using magnets to your advantage to hold things in place in such a way that you can put several things into a part at the same time. And I did use magnets in some interesting ways in this model. I have some very tiny magnets that I have stored into basically a stack, so they kind of make a stick. They're the rare earth magnets that are very strong, and I end up using them as a tool in that stack to guide some of the very small round pieces inside other parts into their slots. Something that I couldn't really easily achieve with tweezers, or at all achieve with tweezers, but basically having a stick of a magnet to hold one end of the piece and guide it into the other. Another sort of advanced technique that I use to help build this model, and something that you kind of have to have the experience to develop. And I did the complexity of this model, I guess it's a bit inevitable that somewhere in the instructions there's going to be some mistakes. And one of the first things I ran into was part H115. And when I went looking for part H115 when I was building, I believe it was the arm, the part that I found did no way match up with the part was listed in the instructions. And I thought, oh good gracious, what am I going to do now? And I looked and I searched and I tried to figure out what's going on. Have I got something wrong? That they transpose a number? Is it supposed to be a part of another sheet? And after a fair amount of searching, I finally figured it out. There's two H115s. So somewhere in the complexity of this model, they accidentally labeled two parts the same letter and number on the same sheet. So there's two H115s, so be aware of that if you're making this model yourself. One I think is in the lower left of the sheet, and one's kind of on the right side a little bit higher. One is going to be the part you're looking for, and one is not. You'll run into that later on in the build. They each have their own specific place. They're very different, so you'll be able to tell them apart. But if you're looking for H115 and you can't find it, keep looking on the sheet towards the other side. There's another part, and that's one of the things I ran into. Now I will also say, and I don't think I noted this anywhere in the build, but looking through the instructions in certain areas, and I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but there's a sticker there. It looks like they've placed a slightly off-white sticker over the part, and this happens 2 or 3 times in the instructions, where I'm guessing that somewhere along the lines, and I'm looking for another one here, they realized there was a misprint, and rather than reprinting the entire catalog, there's another one there, where they've just added a sticker over a part, probably labeled parts wrong and had to correct it. So be aware of that. Another interesting little tidbit, and I can't really blame MU for putting their logo on the back, but I ran into some issues getting the logo lined up that's on the back of the model. And honestly, I'll just start by saying that really the piece that has MU on it, you really don't need to put that on the model. It's just for them to kind of label it and say, hey, this is our model, and put their logo on it. I got a little mixed up in the instructions because at one point it's facing one way and then it flips over to the other, and again these instructions aren't much for hand holding, and I missed that part and I didn't flip it over properly and I put it in properly, and by the time I realized it, by the time it was in a position where I knew which way was up and which way was certainly down, it was too late to fix it. And I could have tried to fix it, but I didn't want to. But in hindsight, you can really just leave that one part off, and I don't remember what part number it is, but just leave that part off if you don't want it on there. The model still comes together fine. If I was to do this again, I would leave that part off. And one last little tidbit, a little warning for you. I would suggest being very careful, and this kind of goes back to saying if you want to build the model in a position or in a place where you don't have to move it a lot, because as I got towards the end of the build, moving these sheets around and clipping all the parts off, some of the parts begin to get stressed and break. And it is quite a challenge. These large sheets that are starting to get empty and more floppy, you still have some pieces there towards the end of the build that are flexing when you pick the sheets up and are trying to put it in a position to clip it off, and it's just, you only have 2 hands, you're trying to clip a part off. It's hard to hold the entire thing even, so I did run into a situation where 1 or 2 parts began to flex and break just from the movement of the sheets, picking them up, clipping the parts off and putting them back. It may not be such a bad idea to go ahead and clip all the parts off in the beginning and organize them, but that would be a real chore. I didn't do that. I don't really care to clip all the parts off in the beginning because I'm afraid I'll lose them, but I know some people do, but for this model that would really be a chore to do. In the end, you end up with this glorious, detailed, and very large model to put out on display. And it is such a wonderful representation of all the work you've put into it. And it is a lot of work, and it does take a lot of time, but it is so very much worth it. The metal is fairly strong. I didn't really have a lot of problems with things breaking or being difficult to bend or flex or shape. It's pretty much in a similar line as Metal Earth or Peace Cool. Quality of the metal seems pretty good. It's magnetic, which makes maneuvering some of it a little easier. Again, the tricks that I pulled with the magnet to get some of the pieces to either stay in place or guide them in place, the fact that this metal is actually magnetic certainly helps that a lot. The depth of detail that goes into this model, there's so many pieces, and that's one of the reasons it takes such a tremendous amount of time, because you're adding in so many detailed pieces, and it all takes time, but in the end it adds up to this just gloriously detailed model with little splashes and bits of color on top and buried underneath, pieces that are underneath other pieces, pieces that are layered on top of other pieces. The depth of this, I keep pointing this part out right here that's in the back of the arm. It's a couple of little cylinders buried inside under a sort of grill. That just, the fact that they did that and added that kind of detail that doesn't stand out at first, but when you notice it, it's like, wow, this is a really layered and complex detail model. And I keep pointing out the back of the legs. This is much more obvious, but it, again, that section inside of there, all of those shapes, takes probably 30 minutes just to do the inside part that then goes on the back of a larger part, which ends up being on the inside. It's just the complexity and depth of it all is so amazing, and the way these arm pieces come together, where it's actually a couple of pieces wrapped around, a couple of folded and shaped and detailed pieces that wrap around another centerpiece to create these sections of the arms. The layering on it is just outstanding, absolutely outstanding. I really enjoy it. This is an awesome model. At the time of me buying this model, this came from AliExpress. I actually got two different versions, or two different models, same model. I got them from two different sellers. Worked out just fine. I think one of them came from Crazy Toys or Crazy Toys UK. One of them came from Magical Model Stores. Both of them arrived just fine. One did have a little bit more styrofoam packaging, I think, than the other. I believe that was Crazy Toys came with more packaging, but I could be mixed up. But they both were packaged decently and both arrived just fine and fairly quickly. Being in the United States, ordering it through P-School, that comes from China, so it is a bit of a slow shipping. It does take a while, but it's worth the wait. It was around $50 or $60 for the model at the time. I'm not sure the current price right now. That was probably 2 months ago, because it's taken me that long to get around to building the whole thing and doing all this video. But is it worth it? Absolutely. It's an expensive model, and I reiterate, it is not a starter model. It is a more advanced model. It's one that I would strongly recommend working your way up to, getting experience with the smaller Metal Earth models or knockoff models, or smaller P-School or Tenyo models, or maybe even some of the smaller Picture Kingdom or Peace Fund models, just to get started and work on some of the smaller ones. Maybe move up to the Iconics level models, maybe some of the larger Picture Kingdom models, or some of the larger P-School models, before I would even attempt one of these larger MU models like the Megatron. Work your way up and get some experience, but once you're comfortable making these models, take the plunge, spend the $50 and take your time. Find a nice spot to set up and build this model that you can come back to, and you don't have to move around, and take your time. And certainly if you need some help, watch any of the videos that I've got on this entire build, and best of luck to you. It is a wonderful model and so exciting and amazing. Each part you complete, I just sat there looking over each part just in amazement at what I had just created, bending and shaping little pieces of metal. Lovely build, and it's been a real pleasure and joy to put it together. I'll leave it at that. At this point, I'm just going to keep repeating the same things over and over again. I do want to say thank you to my Patreon and Ko-Fi supporters for your support in these videos. You've helped make these videos possible, and you've certainly helped make this large model possible, and all the review videos and build videos that come with it. If you enjoy these videos, consider becoming a Patreon supporter, or at least a little donation through Ko-Fi. A little bit goes a long way, and I greatly appreciate it. It helps keep these build videos coming and these review videos coming. You can check out links in the description, and there'll be a link to Patreon here in just a second at the very end of this video. As always, thank you for watching, and keep on keeping on.